So why should there be a hang-up over the term genocide? To find out, we paid a visit to Armenian-American human rights activist Dr. Hovsep Fidanyan. The iconic Armenian crossstone, or khachkar, in his backyard is a not-so-subtle indication of his dedication to the Armenian cause, as it's called. First on the list for Americans championing the Armenian cause is binding genocide recognition by the United States Congress. But more important, Armenian Americans insist, are recognition, reparations, and restitution by the Republic of Turkey. The truncated tree behind the stone cross, Fidanyan says, appears as a symbolic representation of what happened to the Armenian nation 100 years ago. He's gratified that state legislatures, parliaments, and genocide scholars have deemed what happened to the Armenians a century ago as genocide, but he prefers to go right to the source and end the argument once and for all.
The man who coined the term genocide was Raphael Lemkin, a Polish Jew, a survivor of the Jewish Holocaust. He created the word genocide to describe what happened to the Armenians, Assyrians, Greeks, and other Christian minorities in the Ottoman Empire in the beginning of the 20th century, and subsequently to his own people, the Jews of Europe, during World War II.
Genocide is a new word combining the Greek word genos meaning race or group, with the root of the Latin sidere, meaning to kill. Dr. Raphael Lemkin, who is professor of law at Yale University and specializing in teaching matters about the United Nations. Dr. Lemkin is the man who created the word genocide. Dr. Lemkin, could you give us a little background on how you came to be interested in this genocide?
I became interested in genocide because it happened so many times. It happened to the Armenians, and after the Armenians, Hitler took action.
Lemkin became the leading force behind the drafting and adoption of the International Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, adopted unanimously by the United Nations General Assembly in Paris on December 9, 1948.
Yes, Lemkin was Jewish, yet the State of Israel has not acknowledged the historical fact of the Armenian genocide due to geopolitical considerations. That in itself is a tragedy. Many Israeli politicians disagree with the policy of denial, but still there is no acknowledgement by the Knesset of Israel, a country made up of survivors and descendants of survivors of the worst genocide in world history. In fact, there is an Israeli PhD candidate at the University of Utah, Tal Buenos, who recently wrote in 2 English-language Turkish newspapers that Israel should never recognize the Armenian genocide because it may, quote, haunt Israel in the future, unquote. Shame on Mr. Buenos for such intellectually bankrupt and twisted logic. Well, on the eve of the 100th anniversary of the Armenian genocide, it's time that the world over, people know what happened and recognize what happened to the Armenian people was a genocide, period. The list of eyewitnesses, intellectuals, political figures, researchers, academicians who acknowledge the veracity of the Armenian genocide is exhaustive and irrefutable. But perhaps even more credible was the New York Times that published the first rough draft of history as it was happening, publishing 145 articles about what befell the Armenians when 65 to 70% of the Armenian people the world over were exterminated. 82% of the Armenians in Western Armenia, as I like to call it today, occupied Western Armenia, were massacred and destroyed by the cruelest means possible, thus depriving the nation of its homeland. September 25th, 1915, 450,000 killed in recent massacres, 600,000 driven into exile. September 30th, 1915, wholesale murder in Armenia. November 1917, Armenians killed with axes by Turks. July 1919, even the new Turkish government of Turkey condemns its war leaders for massacres. The fact is that Adolf Hitler took his cues from Talat Pasha, one of the 3 masterminds of the Armenian genocide. Destroy completely all of the Armenians living in Turkey. An end must be put to their existence, however criminal the measures taken may be. No regard must be paid to either age or sex, nor to conscientious scruples. So said the Ottoman Empire's Minister of the Interior, Talat Pasha. Then you had Hitler, some 23 years later, saying, "I have given orders to my death units to exterminate without mercy or pity men, women, and children belonging to the Polish-speaking race. It is only in this manner that we can acquire the vital territory which we need." After all, who remembers today the extermination of the Armenians? As we approach the 100th anniversary, we need to put the controversy to rest of whether what befell the Armenians was a genocide, and inform the world that on April 24th, 1915, the top 300 Armenian leaders and intellectuals were rounded up in Istanbul, or what was then called Constantinople, and summarily executed. Winston Churchill did not mince words when he used the word Holocaust prior to the coinage of the word genocide. Way before World War II, in the 1920s to be exact, Churchill wrote his classic 5-volume series, The World Crisis, about World War I, from its origins to the long shadow it cast after the so-called Great War ended. In Volume 4, The Aftermath, Churchill wrote, "As for the Turkish atrocities, helpless Armenian men, women, and children together, whole districts blotted out in one administrative holocaust. These were beyond human redress." Anyone with a sense of decency or a modicum of humanity must spread Lemkin's word genocide in its intended context and put this ridiculous debate to rest. Neighbors, friends, academics, and especially politicians must acknowledge this historical fact and honor the memory of the 1.5 million innocent victims of the first genocide of the 20th century, and demand reparations and the return to the rightful owners, the Armenian people, their lands, their churches, and their personal properties.